obviously online. We have done some.
Oh, we lost him.
Sentence as well. Kicked out.
I will let him back. We do have a few people in the waiting room. Oh, he's come back now.
Sorry about that. Don't know what
Couldn't agree
happened.
more.
I got a message that it was live streaming and it just killed the whole thing. Thank you so much, you three, in advance. The format of these and you is 3 presentations. We have a very active chat which we'll monitor. I will chair as best I can with people like Paul and Taz and Catherine helping as well. And the point about these is that we write everything up and it's all published publicly. That it's not lost behind a password on NHS Futures or anything like that. It's kind of, as per the Goldacre review, proactively open and shared. And we've got people coming in now, Taz, haven't we? I'll give people a minute. So thank you to those for joining us who are in so far. We usually give it another minute or so and then we'll make a start, but really good to see so many people in already. I think this is because we said you would wrap your session, James, that so many people have joined, but
sorry to let everyone down in that case.
It won't be lost in the content. Just while people are joining, so it's 3 minutes past, I'll give people a kind of quick introduction and a background, and then we'll start. We usually wait till 3, so we're there now. We've got more people coming in, which is brilliant. Quick bit of background to these for people who haven't been before. Paul and I set these up during COVID when the kind of pace of development around data just needed to be so fast, and we did not have time to wait for information governance committees. So fortunately, there was a thing called a COPI notice put in place so that people could proactively share data really quickly. And we just found through friends and Twitter and introductions that there was a load of amazing people doing a load of amazing things with data really, really quickly and really openly and publicly. And COVID, for all the bad things that happened, produced some really good joint working, particularly around data. And there were some amazing examples, and they're all on the website. So feel free to go and look at those. They're all published openly. There's no passwords or anything to get to them. We've run a series of in-person events, some hybrid ones, and we run this series online. And picked a whole series of topics. I mean, during COVID, we were doing them kind of week by week, based on the latest amazing person that we'd found who had scraped a load of government websites and created, I think one of them was called Creating a Better Data Set Than the Government, which was proven and was substantially cheaper than what was going on at the time. And it's settled into a rhythm of topics that we kind of regularly try and come back to. So we're a kind of an analyst community. And this talks particularly to what we're doing today. Very interested in the proactive sharing of data and techniques, very interested in the professional accreditation of analysts and the recognition of the analyst community. And we are particularly interested in how that massive new opportunity to work in data and AI is taken up. And I think particularly with Andy's presentation, which is the third one, we are worried that there's a gap there, that it's the sort of the usual people that would be coming through into these types of roles. And I'm trying to, on a personal level, create as many different and kind of interesting routes into analytics as I can. So I've taken an academic role recently. I'm going out to schools, working with people like Andy and James and Hugh and others. We don't want this to just be the kind of normal procession of white men into tech jobs. So there's a whole range of topics that we're going to try and cover relatively quickly. We're really lucky to have, I sort of said, these are the 3 people I want, and you don't usually get all 3. It's a bit like kind of putting on a bill at Vegas, and you don't get Beyonce, but you get someone who's a bit like Beyonce. But we've got Beyonce up first, which is brilliant. And we have the three biggest names that I wanted. So it's a really exciting opportunity, and we've got lots of us in. So I shall stop and hand over first to James, and then Hugh will come in, and then Andy. But please ask away in the chat anything that you want, any resources that you've got you think people should be looking at, drop them all in, and we will write the whole thing up and we will publish it at the end, and we'll get you away on time before 1. So over to you, James, and thanks for coming.
No, it's my absolute pleasure, Mark, and thank you so much for having me. It's a great privilege to be here. So it's my job to give you, I suppose, a little bit of an intro to what the three of us are going to be talking about, which is data, skills, and capabilities, and a little bit of education as well. I'm going to share a couple of slides, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Hopefully that is all showing now. So I run something called the Digital Academy for Health and Care. I'm based in NHS England, the commissioner for the NHS. And our job as a team is to try and help as many teams as possible in health and care deliver more value more quickly. And you'll notice I didn't mention data or digital there, and it's for a reason. Broadly speaking, and I'm going to talk today about data literacy and at the organization level, data literacy is in itself a means to an end. We often in the digital and data world assume that everyone is on the same page as us when it comes to data, or the importance of data, or the importance of digital, or the importance of skills associated with those things. And although everyone recognizes they're important, not everyone agrees how important they are. So I'm going to start the story a few steps further back, if that's okay, for a more generalist audience. Many of you will have made these connections before. I felt a need to take this story right back to its first principles because I wasn't getting the buy-in that I needed for the agenda that I was trying to address. So this is the reason why we are doing the work we're doing. It comes down to a discussion about what value is. The picture that I've shown you is a picture of the quadruple aim. Many of you will know, although not as many as you might think, that the quadruple aim is an international standard. It was owned by the Institute of Healthcare Improvement, but it's been adopted by pretty much every healthcare institution around the world as a description of what we're aiming at, what we're trying to improve. Now, I don't know if you're like me, I could never remember what the blooming quadruple aim was. So I've translated it in my head, and I promise you, you will never forget it again after this. I'm going to translate it through the lens of the users who we're trying to serve, the people who we are there to support. So the first one, oddly, bottom left, patients, obviously, sometimes known as service users, sometimes known as clients, depending on which organization you work for, the people who receive the services that we offer, the reason why health and care services exist. We need to make sure that the services we offer patients, I hope you'll excuse me from just using that one term to describe all of them, are better, that their outcomes are better, that their experience is better, that we harm them less. Broadly speaking, that's what that box is about. The user is patients. If I go to the right, bottom right, that second group is workforce. We have an exceptionally stressed workforce. We had a little conversation earlier about stress, actually. But the workforce in health and care is tremendously stressed. There's risks of burnout. We have seen all sorts of industrial action this year, which is an indicator of the sorts of pressures our workforce are under. It's our job to improve the value for the workforce, making their experience of health and care better, and of the workplace better. Top right, the user base here is the taxpayer. This means whatever we do needs to be more efficient, ever more productive. We need to be getting ever more bang for our buck. On average, the NHS makes a 1% productivity increase a year, which is comparable with private sector. And it achieved that productivity gain all the way through COVID. In fact, all the way back to the banking crisis. There's no other industry that maintains as high a level of productivity as consistently. And finally, improving population health. The user base here is people, populations, and the public. And this is recognizing that prevention is better than cure. I hope now you will never forget the quadruple aim. It's all about patients, the workforce, the taxpayer, and the public. That is why that's why we're here. And there are two broad ways you can increase value. You can do more, or technically less, of things that you're doing already. That means farming more cash into doing what we've been doing, but more of it. More doctors, more nurses, more knee surgeries, more care homes, more GP visits, that sort of stuff. Or you can do things differently. Now, in actual fact, the long-term workforce plan says you need to do both. We need to do more and different in order to meet the demands set on us by our user base, the people who require health and care services. But more and more of different is underpinned by better use of digital technologies and data. It is proven by Moore's law. You're a data professional, so you'd have already spotted that this is a logarithmic graph, and therefore a straight line logarithmic graph demonstrates a true exponential rate of change that I can summarize like this. Our issue, of course, is not that there isn't enough data and there's not enough technology around. There is plenty of those things. Our difficulty is this other line that I've called human adaptability, our ability as people to keep up and to use the opportunity that digital and data provides. And that gap is getting ever bigger. We do not increase our human adaptability, our digital readiness at an exponential rate. Adding to that, change initiatives using digital, in fact, change initiatives full stop, fail to deliver on the benefits that they specify in their business cases about 70% of the time. This is a well-established fact that we never, ever talk about. The interesting thing is that the reasons why those initiatives fail are cultural or skills-based. Only about 20% of them are down to funding issues. Only about 20% of them are down to technology choices. About 60% are cultural issues, ways of working, and skills-related issues. And they're my sources. So if we're going to try and address that, who needs to behave differently and who needs to add value? Here is why I and the Digital Academy concentrate on the development of teams. We work on the slightly controversial assumption that the unit of delivery of value is not the individual, but it's the team that delivers a service. So services are what we have: ophthalmology, surgery, outpatients, care homes, general practice. And each of those services is delivered by a team, a group of people. And every team is made up of individuals. Every single individual working in health and care is part of a team delivering a service to a set of users that is delivering an amount of value to those users. Our job is to increase that value and increase the rate at which we can increase that value, the rate of change. This is how we can conceptualize it. Our aim is to, it's not really creating services, the Digital Academy doesn't do that, but our aim collectively would be to do that. Our aim in the Digital Academy is to support the creation of services staffed with, in inverted commas, perfect teams. Now, what do we mean by perfect teams? It's the sum total of skills collectively for a team to enable that improvement, that value add continuously and as fast as possible. And increasingly, digital and data skills are making up more and more of the skill set required by that team. So how do we do that? It's not just skills-based. So what I've been talking at the moment about what we call physical capability, this is looking through a model called COM-B. The B is behavior change. If you articulate the creation of high-performing teams or perfect teams of behavior change, you need the COM bit. This is capability, opportunity, and motivation. Comes from some research led, I think, by UCL back in 2014. There's loads and loads of different behavioral change models. This happens to be it's kind of like a meta model, really. It's taken all of those and taken the best bits of them. But I find it a really useful way of thinking about how you create high-performing teams. And it's not just about giving them all the skills they need. That's that physical capability. They also need to be psychologically safe, psychological capability. They also need to have the right opportunity. When we did a survey with nursing staff back in 2018, we asked them what a digitally ready workforce looks like for them. They said, thanks very much for talking about all the shiny stuff, all the AI and all of that. All I need is, please, a decent modern day device, with a camera and everything. I want connectivity, no matter where I am in the country, no matter whether in the care home, the client's home, the hospital. I want a decent electronic patient record, electronic client record, that I can both read from and write to, and please, please, please stop writing policies that prevent me from using the first three. They were asking for this physical and social opportunity. Teams also need to have the right motivation. And we've used this model to try and develop a model for education to create better data and digitally literate organizations. So here's our goal: as many teams as possible working in empowered MDTs. They need to be supported by enabling functions who deliver that, in our case, right data sets, for instance, to enable them to work. They need to have the right leadership that is both data driven and user centric. And there's some data from Lloyds Bank and Future.now that establishes that we don't have a great background in terms of digital literacy and data literacy in the wider workforce. And we need to be enabling everyone to have at least basic data literacy. About 1 in 20 people in the workforce probably can't even use a computer to learn. They're completely digitally illiterate. And we think we need to create a capability escalator there. We think we can map that to a bunch of products. So this is my context. To create a digitally and data literate organization, you need all of this sort of stuff. This is through the lens of education, but you need as many people in this sort of tier in the middle, this red group here, working in teams that are both empowered and crucially multidisciplinary. Now, we in healthcare, we talk about MDTs, and then actually what we mean by that is multiple clinical disciplines to make decisions on a patient by patient basis. What I'm talking about here is service level teams that are equipped to make more value, to redesign services and design services so they're able to deliver more value and ever more value. And you need all of these skills in order to do that. You can see the specialist data skills sort of here, but in actual fact, we need data literacy all throughout. And we have talked in the past about the sorts of data literacies you might need at a board level versus a sort of data literacy level versus data specialist level. And this model covers the whole lot. So I've run out of time, but if you would like some more information on what the Digital Academy can do, feel free to snap that QR code. I think the slides will be coming out, Mark, is that right? Oh, they're all, it's recorded live anyway. Just rewind the recording. And I look forward to your questions later. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really helpful, James. We're fine for time. So if people have got any questions, just shove your hand up. I'll start. I'm kind of interested. I mean, a bit like you. You get invited to various conferences, and I just think some of them, particularly what I've been asked to be on a panel for an AI one, and they feel like they're so high level and not deliberately, but just a little bit obtuse, and they're not related to the work that we can actually start to do. And I just wonder how we address that. There's too many I feel like I've been going to conferences called big data for like 10 years, and they're loads of, there's loads of little startups walking around trying to work out who it is they can sell their widget to. Yeah. That they've kind of invested a house in. And I mean, people like you and Hugh and myself and others were at the Hacker earlier, which is a health and care analyst conference. And it doesn't feel like there's enough out there, which is kind of practical day-to-day changes and improvements that can be made. And I just wonder what your view of that was.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure. There's a bunch of stuff there. So firstly, we talk about things like AI and big data because it's easy to talk about a hammer. The problem is that when you talk about a hammer, there's a risk that either everything looks like a nail or you've no idea which end to pick up. Everyone approaches the need for hammers or screwdrivers or drills from the perspective of whether they're putting up a picture or trying to make a table. We approach this from the problems that we have. So one of the reasons why I present the world in the way I present it is because I want us to collectively recognize that the people who have those problems, who are trying to build those tables or put up those pictures, I hope I'm not taking the analogy too far, are people in frontline health and care services. They're the people who want to try and make the experience of ophthalmology better. They're the ones who are trying to reduce the waiting lists to match capacity and demand, to redesign services so they're able to deliver better, higher quality services with less risk. And all the digital and data stuff contributes to help them solve their problem. It's just super hard to have a conference where their problem is being discussed. Now, I have seen people try and do that. There's things like the blueprinting service. There's more than 200 blueprints in that model. I mean, admittedly, that's from a digital perspective, technology perspective, rather than a data perspective, perhaps. But there are examples of this is my problem, this is how I solved it. I suspect they're not as well used or as well known about, because my problem, even though it looks a bit like your problem, it's not exactly the same. And so there's nothing that I can pick up and use. I might get some inspiration from you talking about your problem and understanding it, but maybe we just need to, and I think Hacker was a great example. There was a good balance between some people talking about hammers and some people talking about how I hung up the picture. I think there are, conferences do give you the opportunity for that. It's quite hard to try and translate that to my problem.
Yeah. I think there was only at the Hacker, I think they acknowledged that there was only 1 or 2 presentations about if you'd hung the picture up right.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of presentations about, have you seen my new way, this new hammer I've designed and these new set of nails, and there wasn't enough about does the picture look straight, and is it, and so on. We're really stretching the analogy, but they're kind of the evaluation of it.
Yes.
And I think we're light on that, but I think we know that, so that's something for us to improve on. Hugh, you've got a question which is going to ruin my segue into your content.
Yeah, well, it's actually more of a build on what James was saying, actually, that I think there's a tacit understanding, or a lack of tacit understanding when it comes to investigating these problems. And because there is that lack of understanding between the service provider, if you will, the operational member of staff and the data cohort, each of those teams thinks they need to improve the conversation by learning what the other one does. I think that's a step too far. They just need to understand the problem from their own perspectives. And by understanding that problem from their own perspectives is where they get the shared understanding they need to talk about it from. So otherwise you end up with the situation that we're in at the moment, where people from outside of the data workforce are terrified by it, because they have no idea what we mean by data lakes and big data and all the rest of it. And then we have a data workforce that isn't being listened to by operations, because they're not regarded as the professionals of the service provision. Well, they are. They're just providing the service to the end service provider. And I think it's that disconnect of not wanting to listen and not being listened and not making yourself be heard, I should say, that creates these problems. And that's, for me, at least in part, why there is that lack of understanding between the totality of the workforce and the data profession.
Yeah, I'd agree, actually. And I'll come back for another question, if I may, James. I'm interested in your view on what Hugh and I would talk about often, is that we've got this sort of group of budding analysts, and there's never enough of them, and we'll keep them and train them as quick as we can. But you've got this whole cohort of quite senior people who are really nervous about data, and they sit in board meetings and someone puts a graph up like your one and they go, oh Christ, I hope I hope the next slide's got some words on it, because I don't like that. And occasionally little things will break through. So Sam Riley does, some great stuff around SPC charting, making data count. So I'll put the link in the chat for people, but it's quite rare. And I wondered if at all because Academy sounds like the young and cool people, is there a role for you in coaching senior people to not be scared of data and not get frightened when Hugh starts talking? Do you have a role in that at all, do you think?
Yeah, so the answer is yes, but. So we do have a product, learning product called Digital Boards. So we commission through NHS providers for various reasons. It's had great uptake. At the moment, it's for 2 groups of boards. The first is trust boards, where we're about half prevalence, more than 100 boards of uptake had some sort of development session. The second is for integrated care boards. So we're trying to get to senior leaders in social care and local authorities as well. The nature of those discussions is there are 2 learning outcomes. The first is to help boards develop a culture which is both user-centric and data-driven. So data is explicitly one of our 2 objectives. The second one, bluntly, is to help the board make better decisions about digital and data. So that is because we make a lot of investments, particularly in the digital space, things like electronic patient records, and boards get scared. They get scared because if they make the wrong decision or if things go wrong, heads roll. People do get sacked. And when does a major digital transformation project ever go completely right? So they're worried for good reason. Now, so our education does include helping. Basically, I describe it as opening the door. So boards can see the value of being more user-centric and data-driven, which for me, sort of indicators of that would be for every single clinical and non-clinical service, you've got a North Star metric demonstrating the value and change in value over time. That's a sort of a data-driven organization for me. And we're trying to think about what those sorts of metrics might look like. Now, the but comes in because you've only got so much bandwidth, and boards, like every other adult, they don't like being told stuff that they don't know. So it's got to be led by what they want to learn. Nonetheless, things like COVID have been a real boon for us in the education space. It suddenly became obvious to boards that they needed to get a better grip on things that otherwise they'd have pushed to a chief data officer or a chief information officer to make decisions on their behalf. Suddenly they've become more aware that they need to take collective responsibility for these things. So yes, we do have a role. Yes, we do include it. No, it doesn't do it to the level that you want.
Okay.
For all sorts of reasons.
That's all right. That's something to aim at. We're new into this. Okay, I'm going to keep moving. So Hugh, over to you. The floor is yours until about 42.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it's really my presentation today. I wanted to follow on from what James was talking about in terms of taking a sense of understanding of data and then really embedding it firmly in the workforce as part of in the data workforce as part of the competency framework. I've been working on the competency framework now for the last 2 years since we started the initial desktop surveys and landscape reviews and all the rest of it to try and find out what was going on, only to find that nothing was really being used. So if I share my my presentation, hopefully we'll have a bit more of an idea what I was referring to. So I wanted to speak of consistency in professionalism. I mentioned as a response to what James was saying about data not being regarded as a profession, and I think we've all seen that across the board when it comes to liaising with other divisions and services within the NHS. Data is not always regarded as a profession, but why that is important that it should be, and why it's important that there is a level of consistency in that, and the role the National Competency Framework has to play in ensuring that that happens. That's our little Nico, the National Competency Framework conference lion. There aren't many places, I'm sure, that have got a conference lion, but we've got one, and he's called Nico. So why consistency? What is it that's important about consistency when we're looking at data as a profession? There was a report published through the Health Foundation a few years back now, and the reason I know it's there is because I did it, which spoke of Mind the Gap. It was commissioned initially by Devon Partnership in conjunction with the University of Exeter that called me in to help on that. But it was about the communication gap between operations and analytics, and why when a service manager may request intelligence from an analytics department, an analyst would look at it, raise an eyebrow, do what was asked, give it back, and then the operations lead said, "That's not what I asked for." And the analyst, amused, knows exactly what it is, exactly what was asked for. Reason being, they're talking about the same thing from different perspectives. But it was that gap of understanding in what you're asking for. A classic example is a very simplified one, is of a service manager asking for their bed occupancy for, at that point when he's having his lunch. And the analyst sending back a bed occupancy report, and the operations or service manager saying, "That's completely wrong." I let 5 people out this morning. Obviously, the analyst has sent the HES data, which is from midnight the previous evening, that morning. And it's that lack of understanding of what the definition of that data is in that instance as to why there is a gap in understanding, and that needs to be brought together. And I mention that because that is a question of credibility. There needs to be a consistency with what analysts are saying, so that the professions that are regarded as professions elsewhere within healthcare, the clinicians, the accountants, the chartered personnel colleagues, all realize that data is a profession as well. And actually, the reason that something is the case is because it's said it's the case, and it will be said the same way all across the country. And it's that level of consistency that we need in order to create the credibility with and the colleagues. Now, in terms of why one thinks professionalization is important, it's because there is that formalized education and training for analysts and data professions across the country, so that everything is provided to a standard, hopefully increasing that standard to standards of excellence. There is a community sanction. A community will hold up to its own standards. People will say this is how it's done, and that will be backed up across the country. So if you have an operations manager asking for some information from a data professional, that information should come, at least in its fundamentals, the same anywhere across the country. Of course, there's opportunity for personal flair and excellence, but nonetheless, the standard of basic information should always be the same. And same with the code of ethics. There should be a level of ethical rightness about the information that we're sending to service managers. You wouldn't want to send data that enables service managers to identify a patient if that's not the information they're allowed to have. So you've got those 3 levels of consistency. Ultimately, they lead to the final point, which is authority, so that when operations speak to data, there is that authority, so that people can genuinely believe that data saves lives. Without that level of authority, data doesn't save lives. Data's just on a piece of paper that's meant to make my life more difficult. I don't want to see things on a piece of paper. I want to deal with my patients. Well, actually, let's try and stop those patients coming in the first place, and this is how we can do it. And that professionalization agenda was what's going to get those people who are more interested in treating patients, and rightly so, than data, to be able to say, look, I'll treat this patient, you tell me how to stop them coming in, because they regard you then as that professional, and that's something that we need to do. Unfortunately, at the moment, when we looked at the landscape review, there wasn't anything in place that was going to do that and guarantee it across the country. So we wrote the competency framework. And in a nutshell, this is what it looks like. It's perhaps a little confusing, but it's actually very straightforward. 3 areas of the family tree, all mapped to DDAT: data engineering, data analysis, and data science. These are the 3 core competencies. Each have their own level of competencies, which are broken down, but within themselves, from competency 1 to 6, these are the things that we have identified as, and when I say we, I mean we invited pretty much everyone in healthcare to contribute to this, and we had over 400 people participate on our working groups to get to what we thought and all agreed that it looked like. Each of these competencies, if you can do all this, then you can be competent. You are competent at this level. On the far left, you'll see that there's leadership competencies, but there are also L competencies, which are slightly different. These are the levels according to FedIP and AFA, from associate practitioner all the way up to leading practitioner. And the same is the case with data engineering, data science. Flavored, if you will, if you view the core competencies as the ingredients for a plain sponge, you can flavor that with specialisms, be that your SQL, your SPCs, whatever else you think is going to be core to the role. You flavor it with a specialism. We want to be a specialist in SQL or whatever. What we wouldn't want to do is to put that as a core competency, because it's as a technology, it changes. I remember shared business services saying 15 years ago, may as well forget all of the systems, everything in the NHS is going to go through Oracle. Well, that didn't age well. So we want to keep those out so that at no point does a person who is skilled become obsolete. And then there's the domains which we stripped out the likes of commissioner, provider, acute, central, local authority, and what have you, because they're not core competencies. They're just experiences that you have. And it may be relevant that you want to put it in a job description, but actually the core competencies are the fundamentals of the skills you need in order to carry out the tasks of being a data professional. And this is the sort of things that we came up with. This is the associate practitioner level, sort of entry level. Analyze data for information and or performance measurement within the context of the relevant health and care environment. So that applies, that first one, that C1 applies across all 5 levels of professional registration. But as an associate practitioner, it's broken down into applying basic techniques to transform data into information for your audience, question data in your own analysis, you recognize patterns, etc., etc. So by taking these things, you can identify your skills, you can identify a general what it means to be an analyst, and you can create any job that we've tried to do so far, any job within health and care data analysis, engineering, and data science, using these core competencies supported with the ancillary frameworks of leadership, behaviors, project management, and then using specialisms and domains. You can create any. We've tried it out on it was a public health researcher in central government in Wales that we tried that out on, and it worked perfectly. Well, say perfectly, obviously there are aspects to a role which will never be covered, but in terms of the nuts and bolts, if you were looking to recruit for that position, we were able to pull it out. And we tried a few other bizarre ones as well. Fortunately, they were limited. So that's what the model looks like. You know, you've got your core competencies, which will assume a large part of your role. We also noticed that, you know, as you get further down the leadership track, the further away from the core competency coalface you become, and the more embroiled you are in going to meetings and presenting to people who don't understand data. So there's a greater aspect of leadership in there. But fundamentally, you'll take a big shovel of core competencies, sprinkle it with leadership, specialisms, behaviors, working in projects and domains, and you will end up with a role profile of anyone working in the data profession. But why is this important to professionalization? Everyone loves a good Venn diagram, so we'll have a look at this one. Core competencies are at the center of everything that we do within data. By being able to do these core skills, you can build a development framework around it, looking at what you need to do to improve in certain areas. It's standardized across the country so that everyone can be part of the same development toolkit and best practice be shared, and it be monitored by a curator or professional body. All of these things are dependent on something, on each of the others. The professional body needs to be there to make sure that no single organization takes control of what the competencies look like. NHS England were kind enough to fund this development, but ultimately in 3 years' time, NHS England may go in a very different direction to some of the providers. But the competencies need to still apply to all the organizations. And with an individual organization being in charge of it, that may not happen. You need someone who's going to represent all of those bodies. So a curator needs to be there to look after it, and that will push towards professional registration so that you can say, actually, no, I am a professionally accredited advanced practitioner of data science, and push back and actually then get the rest of the NHS acknowledging data as the profession that it is. The development framework then will enable you to track your own development. As James mentioned, you know, are we looking specifically at people within data, or are we looking for moves from tangential areas. Well, the framework is mapped across 3 of the specialisms within under the data function, so that you can map your own career from data engineering into analysis and into data science, should you so desire. But similarly, when we look at the allied or the ancillary frameworks of project management and leadership, those things too can be mapped into other areas. Now, you would require other areas to be mapped into it for it to be completely all-encompassing. But as a modular design, this should also cover, it can be used to cover every other area within health and care as well. You can develop a management toolkit of previous job descriptions, previous personal development plans that have been written, and help you develop those for your team. You can create standards throughout the country of what good looks like, so that someone who excels in one part of the country can share their learnings and their processes be mapped in another. So all of these things will come from having core competencies at the centre, which is why we are launching the framework on the 2nd of October as a big push now for the whole country to come on board with the National Competency Framework, to get that level of professionalism recognised throughout the country, for that level of consistency, so that we get to a point where we don't have service managers shying away from data professionals. They're a professional who will have a lens on a problem that will give you solutions. We don't want service managers or heads of division or chief operating officers to be afraid of data professionals. We need them to see them as the professionals that can provide the lens on the problem that James alluded to earlier. Thank you for listening to that. I know it's probably incredibly boring, but if you have any questions, now's the time.
It's not boring, Hugh. You're in your tribe, so it's all good. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, it's quite interesting question in the chat about why we use the word data as opposed to information. You know,
okay, yeah,
about information intelligence and actually yada yada. My view, I'm interested in yours, is that we're going into a world where there's complementary but very specialist skills. Data engineering, for example, versus data science. They're really different people. I think we won't get someone who's going to do all of that, I don't think, because there's, but I'd be interested in your view on that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Expediency is my answer. They all fall under the data family tree on DDAT. And DDAT is the one that is the darling of government and always will be, by the way we can see it at the moment. So it's important that we're able to map something closely to that. But absolutely right, data engineering is close to data analysis, but they are very different skills. So we call it the data family because that's what it is under DDAT. But I have never seen an information analyst or a data analyst or a performance analyst or a business intelligence analyst do the same thing from one organization to another. So actually the name for it almost becomes secondary to understanding what it is that they do. People have a different idea of what business intelligence is, for instance. Some people think it's building dashboards. Some people think it's interpreting the data from those dashboards. Some people say it's about how you can translate the data that you get from your data warehouse into a dashboard type environment. And some people think it's all of those things. There's no consistent answer to it. So what we need to do is to define the landscape, and then what you call it after that becomes less relevant as long as you know where it is that you're referring to.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And I think this sort of tees up what Andy's going to talk about, because I having been around data engineers, data analysts and data scientists over too many years, they're quite different people, actually. So when Andy's going out describing what skills they need, you can pitch them, these aren't just data, there's the whole load. The data engineers, they want to handle bigger data sets faster on more exciting IT, whereas a data scientist is much more interested in the shape of the graph and the SPC and the machine learning, and they're quite different, actually. Andy, I'm going to come to you just to keep us on track for time. Thank you very much for coming along. Thanks again, Hugh. And over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, appreciate that. And yeah, real pleasure to be here. I will just bring up my slides, and yeah, here we go. Sorry, can you see my slides on the
Yeah, if you put them in presentation mode,
sorry.
we can see the other mode.
Oh, where is this now? Apologies, one second.
That's right. That's right.
Better.
Yeah, perfect. Now go for it.
Got it. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, thanks. Yeah, really great to hear from you both, James and Hugh, as well. I think fascinating points. I think it does lead on very well to what I want to talk about. But yeah, I certainly took a lot away from it as well. What I want to share with everyone is the work that I work for an organisation called Generation. I want to share what we're doing in order to train people to launch their careers as data analysts, to join the profession. We're doing it in all industries. Obviously, I want to talk about healthcare today, but particularly share on what we're doing across all industries, just to help people who want to join the data field, essentially, and as such aren't able to yet. So if I can first give you just a very quick introduction into what Generation do. So we're a charity. We're actually a global charity, first set up in the US, spun out of McKinsey about 10 years ago now. But we really with the aim of helping people who are struggling to get into work, who face barriers to employment, to overcome those barriers and launch the careers that they want. In a nutshell, that's what we're here to do. And so far, we've helped about 80,000 people around the world to skill up, overcome those barriers, launch the career that they want. Let me keep going. Why we do what we do, we're always talking about this at Generation, that talent is equally distributed. Like we're all bored with the the talent distributed throughout communities, throughout countries, throughout people, equally distributed, but opportunity is not. And what we really, I think what demonstrates that very well is that at the moment and on a regular basis, there are the same number of unemployed people in the UK as there are live vacancies, with regular reports of employers of the struggle that they have to fill those vacancies. Yet there are people out there looking for work, and what underpins that is that unemployment is disproportionately felt. So if you're young, if you're an ethnic minority, if you have a disability, you're more than twice as likely to be unemployed and remain unemployed as your peers, as the average across all groups, and sadly, that's being perpetuated. That is proving very hard facts to change, even though the will is there. It's hard to do so. What we take from that Generation, when you see that the will is there and it's hard to change, is that traditional routes to skills development and to training don't quite meet what employers want, and at the same time, the impact of that is felt by people that are most in need and people that actually most need to work. Now, if we apply that to the data sector specifically, because they're obviously very broad stats, this is really acute in data. These first couple of stats I'm quoting here from the UK government report on the shortage of data skills in the UK, which was actually published a couple of years ago. These things really hold true. There's a lot of companies struggling to recruit skills, have been struggling with those skills for a number of time, and yet the demand for all data skills, but analytical skills that I've picked out here particularly, is growing. World Economic Forum puts it at the top of its emerging professions a few years ago, and then now very recently, the most recent LinkedIn report, which is accumulation of data around people's job titles and job postings and that kind of thing, shows that analytical skills and even if you dive into that more specifically, SQL, for example, really high on the list of what people are looking for. As I say, that this is an ongoing problem and it's sticky. How we've approached to solve this, which I think that a lot of that you can take things from this when you think about your hiring, when you think about how you're looking to fill any skill shortages that you have or contacts you have, have as well, is the first point that we start with is actually what do employers need? So, we're a provider of boot camps. Essentially, we run skills boot camps to train people up for their profession. It's all done by going out and forming panels of employers, people who work in the industry, people who are already analysts, for example, or hiring analysts, to tell us what's needed from day dot in this job, through questioning, through observation, through getting to know that, and building a curriculum that suits that. Then we go out, so we're trying to have obviously a social impact whilst we do this as well. It's about solving skills gaps and helping people who can't currently get into the profession they want. So we go out and we specifically offer our courses and specifically onboard people onto our programs who face barriers to employment. They're therefore typically from very diverse and underrepresented groups. How do we do that? I think the biggest thing that employers can do when they're hiring entry-level staff, this is what we're talking about really, is people getting their first opportunity in the sector. First thing you can do is don't judge on experience or qualifications. Okay? It's about skills, it's about intrinsics, and it's about motivation. And that's what we use to assess people for our programs. Looking for experience and traditional qualifications, unfortunately, just perpetuates the same obstacles for people, because that's based on whether people previously had opportunities. Anyway, to get on a generation program, we're essentially looking for, do you really want this job, and can you do it, and then launch the career, and do you need our help in order to do so? Do you face a barrier? Point 3, we're a deliverer of boot camps, as I said, but I think I'd hone in again that the really important thing here is that it's built around the skills that employers have said they need, the foundational skills for an entry-level job in that particular profession. And really, it's not only technical, we have a big focus on mindset and employability skills. Takes me right back to James's presentation at the start when he was talking about capability and motivation and how important they are. To be very honest with you, there's as much soft skill training as there is technical on a generation course, because when you're on a generation course, the progression and the journey that you can go on in that 11 or 12 weeks is immense, but it's still only 11 or 12 weeks. A big thing that people can take from a boot camp, from when they're skilling up for a profession, is the ability to keep learning. How do you apply those skills to your next job and pick up the next wave of technology, for example? Fourth, we found really important, don't leave things there. Understand that you've started with employer need, so end with employer need. Continue to understand what employers want, how that fits the people that we're training. So we personally take a really active hand in then working with employers to find exactly the right people from our boot camps that are from your local area, meet your needs, are a good culture add to your organisation. All those kind of things, I think, are an important step as well. Okay. To give an overview, therefore, of the type of people that we support people from all barriers. You'll come across other organisations who also do a great job of helping us specific groups. For generation, we've in recent years widened our model to allow anybody who faces barriers to employment, not in a specific group. So you can see a bit of background here on the different groups that we support. I think what I would say when you are doing hiring, working with generation, working with anyone similar, is see who's coming through, see what groups you can support and make sure that when you're hiring at the entry level, you're having a social impact, because you can, whatever area you're in around the UK, there will be there will be people in your area struggling to get into work, and with the right approach to skilling them up, we can allow them to launch the career they want, and you to support your local community as well, which you all work in healthcare, so obviously, I'm taking it as a granted you all want to help your local communities, but you're investing your lives and careers in that. So, it's doable from an employment point of view as well. I touch on what our data analyst bootcamp is, but Mark rightly pointed out that at Generation we see upskilling as being very profession specific. So I've honed in on our data analyst bootcamp right on this slide, but we do actually have separately a data engineering bootcamp. We find the type of people who want to be on it quite different, the type of skills that people need quite different, really, I think, distinct professions these days, and that's why we've created 2 distinct streams for them. The data analyst bootcamp gives you good insight to what it is. 11 weeks, full-time, intense, but learn all the foundational skills you need to learn how to be an analyst, start in that role. We've actually launched that one in collaboration with Microsoft, and as I mentioned earlier, hand in hand with a number of employers as well, who've helped us to form the content. And I wanted to demonstrate bring it back to healthcare a little bit by showing the types of employers that have employed people from our boot camps. There are a number of healthcare organisations, a number of public sector organisations, but there are a number of financial institutions, management consultancies, retail, across all the spectrum. What we believe that our job is to provide people with the foundational skills that they can take and then apply to any sector. So if you do ever find yourself hiring from Generation Bootcamp or similar to us, I think the really important thing that you can look for is the foundational skills and the ability then to pick up what health analytics means, and be able to, and a passion for it, of course, as well. What I can say is that a number of people have gone into different healthcare roles, but a wide array. And finally, I always like to end on this because what we really care about is helping people who face barriers to employment. And I just want to give an example of Raju, who I know from our very first data analyst bootcamp in London, which was about 18 months ago. Around the UK, we've now helped about 300 people through that specific analyst bootcamp. But Raju was one of the first and was, in his own words, struggling to find his path, 0 hours contract at a local gym, didn't love it, didn't love the opportunity, didn't have many opportunities with it either, didn't know a lot about analytics before he joined our bootcamp, but thrived through his own application and hard work, really, as much as anything. He really dived into the mindsets training, the communications training alongside the technical stuff, and he's well into his career at a data consultancy, actually specifically in sustainability that they do. He didn't know anything about sustainability either before he joined there, but he's loving life there. Last time I spoke to him. That's it. Happy to answer any questions. Do feel free to reach out to me as well after this, or connect with me on LinkedIn or like if you have any questions about skilling people up for careers in data.
Thank you, Andy. That's brilliant. Paul have liked that third to last slide because it said Leeds on it twice. So probably you and him need a longer conversation offline. So these meetings are just to try to introduce people to each other. So there's some people on this call. We will also post all this and push it through Twitter and all the channels that we can use anyway. So I'm sure plenty of people will get in contact. I said I'd get people away by 1. I will still try and do that, despite me asking James that second question and him going into quite a lot of detail. Very grateful for everyone dialing in. We'll publish everything, we'll write it all up, and we will publicise our next event, which will come around in about 6 weeks, I think. So I will let you get hopefully some lunch, but if not, straight into your next meeting on time. Please feel free to contact any of us through the website, through Twitter, through email, whichever you need, and we'll get it all out to you very soon. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thanks to our speakers in particular.
Thanks a lot. Bye.